Good morning, everybody. Hi, thanks very much for coming to this presentation. This is about the patterns and practices mobile application blocks. Now, just to get sure that you've got the scope of this right, so make sure you're in the right session. Usually when you see the words patterns and practices, I don't know, many of you will have heard of that group in Microsoft, and they produce a lot of sort of pretty high-level guidance and toolkits and a lot of stuff on good practice and good techniques and lots of good architecture. Actually, this session isn't about architecture as such. What it is about some useful building blocks that are in their offering that's now sort of 18 months old, the Mobile Client Software Factory. Now, I don't know if any of you came to TechEd last year. I actually gave a talk on this last year as well. I mean, this is a different talk, but you know, the reason why I keep talking about this is because these are such a steal for mobile developers, the patterns and practices blocks. They solve some pretty difficult problems in a very neat and tidy way. And anybody who's doing mobile development should be thinking about using these blocks where appropriate, because they do give you such a lot. And that's what this talk is about. I'm going to try and show you how I use them in my own business to solve common problems that we have to encounter in mobile development. So you don't need to be a solutions architect, just a developer who's interested in solving problems in a neat way. So for those of you who don't know me, I am an MVP for mobile application development, Compact Framework. I have my own company based in North Wales. We have a book out, which if any of you have seen Daniel Moth speaking at this conference, no doubt you'll have heard about, and again, and again, and again, and you're going to hear about it again. And actually, I've got one copy here to give away at the end of this session, so pay attention. I'll ask a question at the end, and one lucky person will go away with this. Actually, this is my last free copy, so you're very privileged. After that, I have to start buying them myself. So that book is out. It's the only book out for Compact Framework 2 and Visual Studio 2005. It also has a chapter at the end, a first look at the Visual Studio 2008 innovations. So that's advert over on that. Okay, this talk, I'm going to just introduce you to what the Mobile Client Software Factory is, how you install it into your system, and then we're going to look at specific bits of that are really, so that I think are the kind of the easier bits to use, to be honest, and so they're the ones that you can adopt very easily into your day-to-day operations, and you can get big wins with this stuff. And so the topics there I'm going to cover, the orientation-aware control. We're going to look at how you can access web services over intermittent connection networks. You know, one fact of life we always have with mobile application development is that you will not always have a reliable network connection. And you know, this is something that mobile devs have known about for years, but actual fact, interestingly, if you've been to any of the sync services talks of Steve Lasker and those guys, you know, people are waking up right across the board to this problem of edge of the network devices, computers. So we're not just talking about devices here. I mean, you know, laptop computers, any traveling computer is going to have intermittent network connectivity, which raises interesting questions that you have to solve as an application developer in how do you keep your application working when you haven't got a network connection. So in the Mobile Client Software Factory, we've got the disconnected service agent, which solves this problem very neatly for calling web services. So I'll show you how that works. The other difficult thing that we have also is how do you keep secrets safe on the device? And by secrets, I mean anything, just something like user credentials. How do you store them safely on a device and in a way that you can update them and you can get at them at runtime without risk of them being sort of an attacker getting hold of them if you had your device lost or stolen? You know, Barcelona's a great city, but you know, it was kind of a bit of a war when they hand out this leaflet at the beginning and say, you know, just be careful, there's organized crime, that sort of thing. So, you know, most of us are carrying high-end smartphones around, and they're pretty attractive to people who might steal them. If you've got company secrets on that device, you know, company data, you need to be concerned about security. Well, we all need to be concerned about security, but the password authentication block in the MCSF gives you one way of solving this particular problem, and I've got a nice demo that walks you through how that works. And I'm going to talk as we go on, well, kind of in the middle actually, how we use these blocks in Visual Studio 2008, because the MCSF was designed to be installed into Visual Studio 2005, I'm sure as soon as you get Visual Studio 2008 in the next few weeks or whatever, you're going to be upgrading your systems and moving on. So you're going to want to know how to use this stuff under the new platform. Okay, so this is a kind of a block diagram of a moderately complex or even a fairly simple mobile application. So kind of think of this as a distributed Hello World Plus. All right. So it doesn't have to do very much, but it does have to talk across a network. It has to exchange data between a server. You know, Hello World messages have to fly backwards and forwards between your device and the server. You only want authorized people to be able to use this application. So if the device is lost and stolen, you don't want anybody else to be able to use it. So it's got to be kind of password protected. The server, of course, uses SSL. You need user credentials to connect to the server. So we've got some sort of straightforward security stuff in there. This actually raises a lot, and it needs to run across a broad range of devices. So let's just sort of pick into a few of those things. So the first one of those, the user experience, okay? So this is how you present your application to your user. Now, you know, these devices are getting so diverse. The proliferation of different devices is amazing. So not only smartphone format without a touch screen, and then all the different PDA formats with a touch screen, but then we've got square screens, and we've got devices that come out by default in landscape, and others that are portrait, some are VGA, and some are QVGA, and quite a lot of them switch from one to the other. Not the resolution, of course, but the orientation, portrait and landscape. So this is a challenge. How would you write one application that's going to work across all these different form factors? So we'll look at that with the orientation-aware control is one neat solution for that. Configuration, okay. If you are going to have a connection to a web service or something, the last thing you want to do is have secret, hard-coded constants in your code. So you want to read them out of a config file. That's kind of standard practice. So in actual fact, the Compact framework doesn't have the system.configuration namespace in it, rather weirdly. It's one of the bits they didn't implement, mainly because there are a lot of third-party solutions to this. Other people have done the work for you. So you just have to find one of these implementations. Now, there is an implementation of a system.configuration-like namespace in the mobile client software factory. So we can tackle that particular problem. The next one, logging. Well, yeah, every application needs to do some logging. Actually, logging, I've highlighted that. You know, you want to know if something goes wrong, okay? You need to have some kind of a log file, and you have to have some mechanism of getting those log files back to your support organization. In actual fact, that's not in the mobile client software factory, so that's one of the things they didn't do. But again, there's a couple of third-party solutions on that. Occasionally connected web services. So this is the one where you want to send these hello world messages back to your servers. Yeah? And you think, well, okay, web services, that's a kind of nice way of doing that, or WCF services or something. But web services are great. You know, you've all done it probably. You've created a little web service, and then you add web reference in your application, and it creates the client-side proxy, and then you have a nice one-line you instantiate an instance of your proxy class, and then you call the call hello world method on it, and it just works, and it's great, and it all works great. Doesn't work so well when you haven't got a network connection, and then all of a sudden this simple interface becomes something more complex, because all of a sudden your logic has to think about, okay, if I haven't got a network connection, I need to sort of store this request and then somehow, and then retry whenever, or I need to monitor my network connections, or maybe on a timer or something. I need to retry until I can send this message, and then I'll get the response back. So, you know, and all the error handling and the scheduling, all this sort of thing, that suddenly becomes a complicated problem. So the disconnected service agent solves this one. I'd said about credentials. You know, you're calling your web service, obviously, perhaps not so obviously, but most of the time you're going to need some credentials to protect access to that. You're not going to allow anybody to call that web service. So you're going to have a username and password that authorize you to use that web service. You need to store that securely. So you can see, you know, already our little distributed hello world is becoming a bit of a, well, I wish I hadn't started this kind of a project. And authorization. This is on the device. I'm saying, well, how do you control who's allowed to use your application? How do you do the password thing? How do we do that neatly? Again, we've got a good problem and answer for that. And part of the disconnected web service thing is about monitoring your connections. You know, actually, we have got on a mobile device, you've got, well, obviously we've got a USB cable connection when you've got a direct pass-through. We've got Wi-Fi possibly. You might have Bluetooth. If it's a phone device, you've got phone networks like GPRS, UMTS, that kind of thing. You've got all these different ways of connecting, and infrared as well. But at any one moment in time, you might have none of these, or you might have different ones to choose from. So we need to have information about that. There's actually nothing really in the, there's lots of low-level methods you could call in the Windows CE networking APIs to find out about specific adapters. But we haven't actually got anything in the compact framework that is network available. So, but we have in the mobile client software factory. And then the physical addresses actually ties in with the configuration thing. Okay, if you also want to store your URLs where you need to connect to that web service, but then again, you might have two flavors of that. You might have a URL when you're outside of your firewall, you're out on the internet, and then another one when you're actually connected to a PC inside your network. You might have a different actual network address in order to get to the same destination. So we need a way of managing that sort of things. Data synchronization. If you're using something like SQL merge replication, getting some data from a back-end server, that again is something that again adds complication to this solution. So by this point you're thinking, well, okay, this sounded like a simple kind of application to build, but I've got all these things to worry about, and it's all of a sudden starting to look like a tough call. So enter the mobile client software factory, which actually is, its main thrust is not actually really directly to solve all those problems, but they have come up with this idea of a reference implementation application. So they've come up with this big interconnecting framework for building mobile line of business applications. And part of the package is this reference implementation, an example application that you install as part when you install it, and you can look at the code and learn from it and steal all the code and adapt it for your own purposes. It comes with a lot of documentation about good design practice, a good practice on how to put your mobile applications together. But the most important bit is the application blocks. Now, these building blocks are reusable components, and their reference implementation uses these blocks to solve all those problems I was just talking about on that slide. But the beauty of it is you don't have to use it in part or as part of the big mobile client software factory framework. You can use them independently in all your own applications. So, and there's a lot of easy wins, as I hope I'll show you in this presentation. There is some additional wizards and things that integrate with Visual Studio 2005, and then some how-tos and quick starts. So you get a lot of projects that show you how to use everything, and it's pretty well documented. And you get it from that URL at the bottom there, from Coplex, which is Microsoft's kind of collaboration, open-sourcey web destination on the web. So a lot of the patterns and practices stuff goes on there. So the patterns and practices are products, are not official Microsoft fully tested, supported things. They're actually shipped with full source code. So the idea is that you take them, use them, if they fulfill your needs, use them directly. But the idea is that you can extend them and you can change them to actually suit your own circumstances. So in my own company, yeah, we use all this stuff, and we've modified it slightly where necessary to suit our own purposes. So it actually is starting to look a bit old in sort of software IT business terms. Because it first came out right at the end of 2005, and we had a refresh in June 2006, which is the current one you can download from there. So yeah, we're already, it's sort of getting on a bit, but it's still really, really valuable and very, very relevant to application development today. Now, you obviously need a version of Visual Studio to use it. You also, there's a dependency on these things called the GACs and the GATs, the guidance automation extensions and the guidance automation tools. Those are all about adding these wizards into Visual Studio. So the Patterns and Practices group have a load of different software factories aimed at different target sectors, the web service, the smart clients, and other different ones. But they all depend on this GACs and the GATs, which are just the hooks in Visual Studio that allow them to add their additional bits in. So you need to have those. And then when you install it, it's obviously a standard MSI. There's two parts to it. So the first part is you install all the projects down, the source code down onto your PC. Then it will ask you if you want to compile it, and of course you'd say yes, you do want to compile the project, so you've got the DLLs already built, and in your own projects you can simply add a reference to the DLLs and start using them. And then at the very end, it'll pop up another window and say, do you want to install the guidance package? Now, the guidance package is the bit at the moment that only installs on Visual Studio 2005. So if you're doing 2008, you're not going to want to do that, or it won't work. There is no plans for them to do a 2008 release of this for the tools bit of it. Now, the application blocks work just fine, as I'll show you. But the tools bit, the bits that integrate in Visual Studio, they're not planning to update for 2008. Now, that being said, the full source code for the guidance bits is included in this as well. So if there's some willing volunteer out there who fancies a go at upgrading it, then you can do that and give it to the community. And maybe I'll even do it myself one day soon if I get some time. And once it's in, and I'll be showing you this in a minute, but once it's in Visual Studio 2005, this is, you have this idea of recipes. So basically, these are wizards in our, as we'd understand them, things you can do with it. The first thing you have to do is enable the whole package. So there's, on the Tools menu in Visual Studio 2005, after you install all this stuff, you'll see something new, which is the Guidance Package Manager. And if you install some of the other the other software factories, you'll see them listed here as well. I mean, the top at the moment, Guidance Package Development, you would never select. But then, as you can see on that slide there, we've ticked the Mobile Client Software Factory saying, yeah, I want to use this. So the point about this is you don't have to create a new solution that's built, you don't have to say a new Mobile Client Software Factory project, although actually it does give you a new template, a new project type that is specifically an MCSF project. You can use this all in your legacy application. So if you've got stuff you've already been developing for the last couple of years, you can come in and do this and enable these additional wizards and start using the add-ins on your existing stuff. And this is where a lot of the quick and easy wins come from. And then once you've enabled the package, then you've got specific recipes, which you can run from the Guidance Package Manager. But the real way you're going to want to run them is just from the In-Solution Explorer. It actually puts in context-sensitive menu options at the appropriate place. So you can right-click on a web reference, and there's an option on there called Create Disconnected Service Agent, which is the DSA wrapper around a web calls to a web service. And as you can see there, on a project, you can right-click on a project, and we can add an orientation-aware control to it. Or you can actually add a couple of classes, which is View with Presenter. So this is the only patterns bit of this talk. Okay, you can add a nice Model View Presenter class, couple of classes to your existing project that implement that pattern very nicely. So it's a good way of getting started with good object design for building Model View Presenter kind of patterns. So those options will turn up in your Solution Explorer. Now, the OAC, Orientation Aware Control, now there is a version in the Mobile Client Software Factory, okay? And the problem it solves is this one. I'll just let me... Okay, so this is my own... I've got the... ignore the Visual Studio stuff in the background, but this is a remote viewer for my own device, which I've got connected here with a cable. The problem that this particular thing solves is this device is actually a standard Pocket PC format in terms of its screen, and it's portrait by default. But like I said, if you go out and buy one of the Windows Mobile Palm devices, they have a different size screen. In fact, I think it might even be square. I'm not sure. I think it's a square screen on those guys. But this particular one is kind of an interesting one. And this has been, ever since Windows Mobile 2003 second edition, all Windows Mobile devices can do this, but the feature is kind of easier to use. It's kind of hidden on some devices. But all of them can do this, which is they can switch the screen orientation around. And this particular device, it happens when you open the keyboard. But on others, I've got a Mio DigiWalker device that I'm working on at the minute, and that actually has a button on the front that you can press to change the orientation. And sometimes on the Today screen, you'll have an icon to switch the orientation. So this one, you can see when you pull the keyboard out, it switches around because then it's all the right orientation for that you'd expect. Now, that screen actually is fine. That screen works just great in either orientation without you having to do very much work. But if I go to another one, oh, didn't mean to do that one. Out of that. So I've just click on an item in this, and it'll go to the summary screen, and then go to the order screen. So this one, you can see the layout there, okay? And then when you think you just want to type something into there. Now, if you remember, it'll switch around in a minute, of course. But actually, there's another field down there. So, wouldn't it be nice, really, if when it was in this orientation, the fields were actually repositioned nicely so that you didn't have to scroll the screen. You don't have to have your users scroll the screen. Sure, it will automatically put scroll bars and it will help you like that. But from a good usability point of view, you really want to help your users to use it without having to do all these extra clicks and taps and things. So wouldn't it be nice if you could actually redesign this to actually automatically repaint when the orientation changes? So that's the problem the OAC solves. And with the OAC control, you can create different layouts for different orientations and also for different resolutions as well. So you can do QVGA portrait, QVGA landscape, VGA portrait, VGA landscape, and square. Well, squared, of course, doesn't matter which way around you are. But so the orientation, the way it does that is you have a normal Windows Forms designer, and there's a login form. And then at the bottom of the properties thing, you'll see there's some links down there. And they're about doing the orientation-aware stuff. And one of them there is rotate. So if you tap on the rotate link under the properties, then in the designer, it automatically switches around. And all you have to do is then drag your fields around to the position you want them to be in that orientation. The control itself then stores those new positions in a resources file. And then at runtime, it will automatically detect the screen orientation change without you having to do any programming. And it will reposition your controls. So it just does all that work for you. Now, the version that's in the Mobile Client Software Factory actually isn't very good. It was a good first stab at it. Now, the company who built it for Microsoft at the time was a company called Clarius Consulting, and they have taken. I mean, obviously, all this Mobile Client Software Factory is free, and you get the source code. So you too could have done this. But what they did is they have taken it and improved it. They've made it faster. They made it more reliable. And most importantly, the version that's in the Mobile Client Software Factory has a bug in it and doesn't work with Visual Basic very well. So the one that's in the kit only works with Visual C#. So I would highly, there is absolutely no reason why, if you're going to use this, you must go along to orientationaware.net and download their free community version, or they do have a supported version if you want to have a support contract on that and get free updates when they release new versions of it. So it's basically the same. It's the same company, but it's the new improved model. So let's show you how easy it is to do. So you saw how this particular screen was not terribly well designed in the different orientation. So let's fix that problem. So this is the problem form that I'm just going to do a new version of this built around the orientation aware control. So the first thing I shall do actually is just show you the guidance package manager. And here there's this rather badly drawn enable disable packages button at the bottom. And there you can see all of the different software factories I've got installed on my system. So the one I want to enable for this particular project is the Mobile Client Software Factory. So I'm going to OK that. And then you can actually say you get these three recipes, which are the wizards that it adds to Visual Studio. So you can actually run them from here. But actually, I'm going to close that. And then you get some documentation as well, a bit of overview about welcome to it and all this sort of thing, available guidance. But I'll close that window. But now, having done that, we get all these additional things on the menu. We can add a view presenter. Now, this on here, the orientation aware control, is the standard one that's in the Mobile Client Software Factory. But I'm not going to add that one, because what I'm actually going to do is add a new item. So I've got the new updated version installed on my system. And it's up there, the orientation aware control. So I'm going to create a new view based on this called the order product view. So it's my design surface. I'm just going to drag that out to a sort of suitable sort of size. I'm going to dock it anyway, so about kind of that will do us. And that's sort of pocket PC, so 220 width. We know that's going to be. So that's the default. No, that's not right. Okay, like that. I've got a very wide screen laptop here. It's all looking a bit distorted to my view. So that's here we go. So then I'm just going to do a bit of show. Where's the show data sources window? I'm just going to drag the some data source onto this just to generate some UI. So there's my. I've got a data set in here, so I'm going to change this to be a details view. Change the binding on some of these things. I don't need any binding for that, nor for that, and nor for actually that one. The quantity, let's bind that as to a numeric up-down control. The other three can be text boxes, and then that's good. And we'll drag it onto here. Just generate some UI. In a minute, thank you. Here we go. Let's just reorganize that a bit. Up that up the top, underneath it, and this go. Just make that a bit smaller. Have it all nicely aligned. Put a bit of standard data anchoring on that. Anchor that to the right. Oh, get that line. And anchor that to the right. Yeah, and this one, we can anchor that to both sides. Okay, so that's the default layout for this. And then I can actually, obviously, rotate it. And it will repaint in landscape orientation in a moment. Famous last words. Oh yeah, there we go. So now I can reposition things how I want it to look in that orientation. And yeah, we're kind of getting there now. So, and then we can just go back to the default, switch the default layout. And it saves those two layouts. So there we've done a bit of nice design work. I'm just going to format that one just to make it look good, just as a currency in the data bindings. Come on, twitchy mouse here. Format that as a currency, so it looks good. So that's going to be pretty good. And so if we build that now, And then I'll be able to drag that onto the form and replace the other one that was not terribly functional. So that's succeeded. Now then, let's go back to our the order product dialog, which is where the these. Oh, stop! That's horrible. Sorry about this. This is something. My laptop has gone berserk. Hey. Oh. They didn't talk about this in the presenter's manual. How to cope with unexpected things. Whoa. Okay. Has it calmed down? Dear, oh dear. Do you know what? I think I'm going to close Visual Studio, and I'm going to let that just calm itself, and then I think you've got the idea there of how to do that. So stop twitching, but okay. This is why you should upgrade to Visual Studio 2008. So I would have shown the, you got the idea. I mean, I would have run it, and it would have switched around, and you didn't need to see all that stuff, and still doing it. Anyway, we'll improvise. Okay. So sorry, that's distracting me. It's twitching in front of my eyes like this. Okay. Right, let's talk about the mobile application blocks. So that was one of them. That's the orientation-aware control, which is the only UI-oriented control. And as I've said, you want to use this new updated version. Now, what about all the other bits and pieces that we've got? Well, in the mobile application blocks, which are at the heart of the mobile plant software factory, there are 8 or 9 different building blocks. First of them, I'm going to talk about each of these, some of them briefly, some of them in a lot more detail. There's the composite UI application block. So have any of you done any development with the CAB on desktop? A couple of you, okay. Anybody tried to use it on mobile? I spoke to you yesterday. Brave man, yes, brave man. If you already use it on desktop, I'll talk about it more in a minute. If you already use it on desktop, then you'll feel in comfortable territory. If you haven't looked at it before, it's fairly indigestible. But it's about building applications out of loosely coupled bits of UI that plug together very loose manner at runtime. Now, the configuration block, I mentioned we have that. We have an implementation of the configuration block, which just really gives you system.configuration methodology. It actually mimics the same classes and methods that you have in the standard system.configuration in the full framework. We have a connection monitor application block, which is very useful for monitoring your, gives you the is network available. The disconnected service agent, I've mentioned it a few times. This is the one, an infrastructure for calling web services over intermittently connected networks. An endpoint catalog, which is actually just something that the other guys use, really. It's about storing in the config file URLs and credentials. There is a data access block, which makes accessing a database, it's a higher level, a kind of facade pattern that just makes it easier to call databases and do operations on databases, makes that a little bit simpler. Password authentication, which is the security bit. I've got quite a lot on that. And then there's a subscription manager, which is helps you talk to SQL Server merge replication publications. So it's a little bit, makes that a bit easier. Again, it's another facade one. Just gives you a higher level API that makes a lot of that sort of stuff simpler than if you were writing all the low level code yourself. And there's an updater application block, which actually is not in the mobile client software factory. But again, one of the other groups that worked with Microsoft on this is a company called Q4 Tech, and they have implemented an updater application block, which is a port. There was an updater application block for the desktop years back, which is about allowing your Windows Forms applications to be self-updating. So when they start up, they can go and check on a web service or on our website or on a share for an updated version of themselves and then auto-update themselves. So kind of click once actually came along for Windows Forms on the desktop and gives you that functionality. Before click once, there was the updater. So we don't have click once for Compact Framework, but we do have this implementation of the updater application block. So I mentioned the composite UI application block is hard, actually. It's hard. I'm sure the gentleman over there will concur that it actually takes a lot of work to actually get your head around how to use this, and it uses its own whole language and ways of building stuff, so it's very, very hard to adopt. Now, when you do adopt it, as the gentleman over there was saying, once you get your head around it and you have integrated it into your processes, then you really win, you get the benefit, because it's very easy then to build additional blocks and plug them into your infrastructure. They're all loosely coupled, so you avoid all these problems of, adding something in over here that causes you to have to change something over there that breaks something over there. So you end up with a very nice architecture. But my advice would be study it. This is actually what I did. I studied it, looked at it, and I thought, I don't know. And I actually came up with my own lighter weight kind of version of it that borrows a lot of the architecture messages in it. So you can learn a lot by studying how they do it, and then take your own learnings from it and perhaps apply it to your own work. But to adopt it for your everyday development, big investment. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore, because what this talk is about is the easy wins. This is the easy stuff to win on. The config application block. So, like I said, Compact Framework doesn't have support for config files, but config files are really useful. So we want that. But this actual block comes with some interesting additional stuff. And the interesting additional stuff is it has the ability to read encrypted configuration files. So this is an important component in the whole security bit of things. So not only can you can put your own custom config sections in there and store bits in there that you don't care if anybody sees, but you can also encrypt sections in it. And there's a tool in there, config section encrypt, that I'll show you later on, that helps you to do that. So here's a config file. I've seen them all a million times, and you just have to have a config sections thing at the top, and you have to create a couple of classes yourself that describe the structure of your particular config section. It's well documented, very easy. You just create a class, inherit from another one that's already provided in their classes, implement a couple of properties, and really that's all you have to do. So once you've done that, then to read it is this kind of code, creating a config section, calling configuration manager to get the section out of your config file, and then enumerate the particular items that are in that config section. So no rocket science here. You've probably all done this, so I would think, on desktop. It's just the same functionality. So it's just in the Microsoft.practices.mobile.configuration namespace rather than system.configuration. Now, connection monitor is kind of interesting. So this monitors your network connections on the device. And out of the box, it looks for cell connections, GPRS, CDMA, UMTS, Edge, and all the rest of them, so data comms over phone networks. It will look for what it calls NIC connections, NIC, which is Wi-Fi, or indeed a wired connection. And it will look for DTPT, desktop pass-through, which is your USB cable. So you're using a PC effectively as your gateway onto the wider network. So when we talk about cradling a device, we really mean plugging it together these days with a USB cable to a PC. So this is very easy to use. It uses and it gives you sort of events that fire when it's got a network and when a network goes away. So this is useful information to us. And it uses some configuration, which will become the reason for this. So it tells you these are connection types it's going to monitor, those three that I mentioned, and it puts a relative price on them. Now this becomes interesting, particularly when we get onto the disconnected service agent in a moment. So if you think about it, think of it in cost terms, if you like. So using a cell connection over a phone network is going to be more expensive than to use Wi-Fi, which again is probably going to be more expensive than to use a desktop pass-through cable. So that's the relative costing of there. Now we can use this later on when we program the disconnected service agent. Yes, question? There isn't a Bluetooth monitor in this, out of the box. But that being said, the ones that are implemented, you get all the source code, and the ones that are implemented are all inherit from a base class they give you, and each of them are just specializations of a base class. And actually, it would be very easy to add a Bluetooth adapter if you had a Bluetooth local area connection or something like that. So it really, most of these fire off in Windows Mobile 5 and later. We have this thing called Snappy in the architecture, the system's state notification API, state notification broker. And thus, it has loads, hundreds of properties you can look at, useful stuff like what was the last album selected in Windows Media Player, and how many appointments have I got today, and all this kind of stuff. But it also has a bunch of events that you can subscribe to around network connections, and including Bluetooth. So you could easily write your own. If you study the code, it would be quite easy to write a Bluetooth monitor and then build it into this sort of thing. Another one of these building blocks, and we're building up to the disconnected service agent, which uses all of these guys. The endpoint catalog is just all it is. I mentioned before, it's just a convenience block that is about storing your URLs and your usernames and passwords in a config file. So this is a classic example of a section that you might want to encrypt. And in fact, we'll do that later on in the demo. So. But this block allows you to, it actually gives you out of the box the config sections, essentially. Nothing happening. Oh, there we go. Whoa, bit of a lag on that. Yeah, it flashed up green there. I won't bother going back to that. So now this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, this is the disconnected service agent. This is by far the most interesting bit of all this. Well, possibly a security thing, but. So the disconnected service agent is this infrastructure for calling web services. And at the heart of it, it has a database down the bottom here. And there's an object in the middle, the one in green, called the request manager. And you work with the request manager. And when you initialize the request manager, you give it an instance of one of those connection monitor application block objects, so it can monitor the network. You give it an endpoint catalog instance, which is the one that's going to tell you what URLs your web services are actually on. And it has infrastructure in there for a web service request dispatcher. So you have a message, you actually send it to your request manager, and actually the request manager then, what it first does, before doing anything, is actually it will go and store it in a request queue in a SQL CE database. And it will configure all the database for you as well, so it's very easy to set up. So it stores it in the database as a queue, and then it will send that message. It will actually be looking at the connection monitor. And when the connection monitor tells the request manager that it has got a live connection, and then the request manager pulls it out of that queue, sends it to the web service request dispatcher, and this guy then actually calls the web service. And this is all happening also very nicely on a background thread. So the web service request dispatcher then does the usual call over the network to your web server, and of course that's processed there. The response comes back, usual request response stuff, back to the request manager, and you get a call back into your application. So that's how it works. So it's a queuing mechanism, a store and forward mechanism using a local SQL Server Compact Edition database. So this is the entirety of the code you need to set this thing up. So first of all, I was expecting that to scroll down, so let's go back. I won't do that. So reading from the top, this is entirely the code you need to set this thing up and get started. So you obviously add references to all these guys. You need to have that the costing for the different connections that I showed you before in your config file, and you need to have an endpoint section with the URLs of your web service where it's going to go to. And then all you do is you create yourself an endpoint catalog at the top there, create yourself a connection monitor. You actually create another wrapper object around that called a connection monitor adapter, which you can see in the second block down there. And then you get the request manager as a singleton. So you just call request manager.instance to get hold of the request manager. And then you initialize it, and you just give it that endpoint catalog. You give it that connection monitor adapter. Not shown on there is a database manager.database, but basically you initialize that just by giving it the location where the database is. And then you call request manager dot initialize, and that actually looks into your database and it automatically configures the request table for the request queue and also a dead letter queue as well for anything that it couldn't deliver. And then you can actually, there are methods, of course, to call the request manager to manually dispatch stuff under your own control, but the real power of this comes if you just let it get on with it. So when you call start automatic dispatch at the bottom there, that starts the process where it's using this connection monitor to wait for a live connection. And every time you post a message to the request manager, it will queue it and then do the stuff you saw on the previous slide and dispatch it only when it's got a live network. So to use it and this is one of those wizards that's in the Mobile Client Software Factory, which sadly is only for C#. The tools don't generate VB code. I'll be coming on to VB in a moment for those of you who work with VB. But to use the tools as shipped, you simply right-click on your web reference and you get one of those context menus comes up and it says Create Disconnected Service Agent. Now you get this wizard comes up. And you can see the 4 box on there is, first of all, it asks you how many stamps to put on this message, okay? Now, this ties in with that costing thing. So if you remember back a few slides back, we had different connections. We had the cell connection was 8, a cost of 8. We had the Wi-Fi was a cost of 2, I think. And then we had the desktop pass-through was a cost of 1. So here, this is the default behaviors. You can override these on an individual message time at runtime. But this is the default for any messages you create using this disconnected service agent. First, we were saying, when I create a message, how many stamps am I going to put on the envelope? So if you put 3 stamps, as shown on that example, what that means is the disconnected service agent won't try to send it when your only connection is a cell connection, because a cell connection requires 8 stamps. So it's a way of filtering your traffic and saying, okay, this message I only want to send over cheaper connections. I only want to send when I've got a cable connection, desktop pass-through, or when I've got Wi-Fi. So it allows you to control your costs, because maybe you don't want to use GPRS because it costs too much. And then you have a number of max retries, because obviously if there's an exception, if the network drops halfway through, that particular attempt to send to the web service will fail, so there's a retry mechanism, but you want to put an end point on that. You don't want to let it carry on forever. So you can put the max retries in there. You can also have messages that expire in a certain time, so that after a period of time that it will stop trying to send it. And you can put a user tag on it as well if you want to use that in your code. So that defines the default behavior. And then to queue a request, well, actually, essentially, it's the same way as you would call a web service. You just call a method. So you get a reference to the request manager, create an instance of the proxy, which this time is a disconnected service agent proxy, which wraps your web service proxy. Create an instance of that, and then you just, that proxy, the disconnected service agent proxy, exposes the same methods as you have on your web service. So if you were used to calling my web service.hello-world before, you would see on here the my web service disconnected agent would also have a method called hello world, and you just call it just the same as you would a web service. But instead of it going directly and trying to do it, it's doing this queuing mechanism. So very easy to use. And then obviously it's queued. It may not happen straight away because you may not have a network. So when it has tried or when it has expired its timeouts or something, you will get a callback. And when you get that callback, then that's when the call has succeeded or has failed, and then you can actually write some code to handle that situation. So and the tools generate you some method stubs for those callbacks. So you get 2. You get on whatever method return and a on whatever method exception. So it will call one of them 2. Now normally on the exception one, you'll just say, and it calls that even the first time it fails to send. So it just gives you a chance to intercept the process. But most times you're just going to say, yeah, retry it until the maximum number of retries has expired. So that's a lot of talk. Let me just put that into pictures if this is going to work. So cross your fingers. Maybe I'll get rid of this guy. Maybe that will help. Right, here we go. Hold on to your seats. Oh, it's not looking good. What is this? Okay. Right. Let me think now, because I'm gonna have to improvise a bit here. Yeah. Okay. Go for that. Plus, my previous demo didn't complete. I'm now kind of having to think, oh, okay, is this going to work? Is it going to hang together? So we'll do our best, but I'll show you the process. So just while this is loading, so here's my project, the one I showed you briefly before. Now, in this project, I've already got, still loading, I've still got already, you can see there in the Solution Explorer, I've got an app.config file. So this is the config that's needed to support this kind of thing. Already got in this solution at the top there, I've got a solution folder with all the different mobile application blocks source in it. So I just tend to include it all in my solutions. You could add a reference to the DLLs, but I tend to include it all. Whoa, go away. So, this is bad news, guys. Huh? Oh, okay. All right, well, let's turn that off. All right. I'm indebted to you, sir. Thank you very much. I haven't seen that before. Oh, great. Okay. You can hear the relief in my voice that we're in business here. Okay, so this is the config we need. We have a config file. Okay, thank you. I won't. I'll get on with the touch mouse. Will be okay. I'll get by with this. Thanks very much. Okay, so you can see the config file. We've got two config sections, which is the configuration. There's my prices stuff, and down here actually is the URL to my web service with the username and password on it. So that's all we need in that respect. And we've got the mobile application blocks. I've added references to all those guys. So here's my regular web reference in here. So let's create ourselves a disconnected service agent for that. So the endpoint is the endpoint name here, which, if you can see there at the bottom, is orders. So that's how it matches up with the particular bit of the config file that we're interested in. And then, yeah, well, we're going to have just one stamp. So I only want to send it over a desktop pass-through connection. We'll give it 3 retries, and then, well, I won't bother an expiry. You can actually override on individual methods in your web service. You can have different behaviors for each method. So this is what this screen is about, but I'm just going to finish at that point. So that's generating me. So this tools are generating some code now in the background. And what it is doing is filled in this disconnected agents folder here in the Solution Explorer on the right here. We've got some code that this has generated. And interestingly, the one that it's showing here is the service agent callback. So this is the stubs for the callbacks. All right. So there we've got our on post order. I've got this web service has a single method called post order. So I've got on post order return and on post order exception. But I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So first of all, what I want to do is go to my main form and initialize the disconnected service agent. So we'll go into here, view code. Now then, so I've got a few. I need to add some using blocks into here. So there's the different application blocks I'm going to use, and then I've got some private data members in here, so I'll just add those into there. So some objects that we're going to then initialize. So in the form1.load down here, that code I showed you to initialize the disconnected service agent. So that is the entirety of the code that I showed you, with the exception of the database application block. bit there, which it creates a database object pointing at a database called appdatabase.sdf in my application folder. It then points catalog, and then we init the agent, and then we call initialize it, and then we call start automatic dispatch. So that sets that all up. So that gets the disconnected service agent running, and then in the order product dialog, this is where we call the so this is the kind of old code. This is where you actually would call, this is where you make a web service call. So we want to replace this. This is the web service call here. So we want to replace that with a call to the DSA. So let's get rid of that. In fact, we don't need those cursor things, because this is now going to just call a background thread. So this is where we queue the request. Set up a couple of imports and the request manager. So now we've got the code that's going to call this thing. Actually, I'm going to have to change this because my previous demo didn't work. Then hopefully this is going to work. Might have to bear with me a bit. So we don't want to update anything there. So we should be that should be pretty good. And then in my callbacks, let's go and put something in the callback so we can see what happens. We'll just put a message box in there. That's in system.windows.forms. So I'm sure you're getting the idea here. I'm going to just build this. I'm sure this is not going to build because that's the problems I had before. Now you can do the same thing, all of this sort of thing. What I'm going to do actually is just switch over to show you how you do this in Visual Studio 2008, because all this wizard code is great, and you can see all this stuff that is generated, and I'm sure you get the idea of how you call that. But of course, all the wizards are doing are running tools in the background, and all they're doing is generating a bit of code. So if you just go and do a bit of a dig into the code that is generated, you can figure out how to make these calls yourself directly. So here is a not that one. This is Visual Studio 2008, which is the same application, but this time it's in Visual Basic, and obviously this time we haven't got those wizards, so I can't anymore right-click on that, and I won't get anything. I don't get any mobile client software factory stuff on there. But I can still in my main form, I can still initialize the. Get rid of these guys. In a minute, in your own time. Ah, so I go slow. So you can still initialize it in exactly the same way that I showed you. Thank you. So here's the initializing the request manager, just the same way as before. And then when we want to make a call to the here, this is where you queue a DSA request in code. So instead of calling the wizard-generated wrapper for the DSA wrapper, you could just create, all you have to do is create an offline behavior object, set some properties on it, which, if you remember, are very similar to the ones that you did in that wizard, so the maximum retries, the number of stamps, and that kind of thing, and the return callback and the exception callback. And then this is the name of the method in the web service proxy that you want to call. You set this request object, you set the behavior that you've just configured up there, and then you set the call parameters, which are the parameter list that you want to send to this web service method. And then you actually give it the type of the web service reference. So this is my orders web service.server. And then enqueue the request with the request manager. And then the callbacks, you set in the behavior up here in the return callback property and the exception callback property, where you give that a command callback object where the type is the class containing the callbacks and the method it should call. And those guys are down here. There's a public class called DSA callbacks, and in it are my two callback methods. So you're doing exactly the same thing, just in code. So it all works the same. This sample code I'll be putting on my website, so anybody who wants to work with this can download it, and you can see how it works. But essentially, the two things are doing the same, just you've got a little bit more help in the Visual Studio 2005 and the wizards. So let's run this and show that it works. So it's going to build, it's going to build, it's going to build. I'll leave that building because I'm conscious that time is running away from us. Because actually, what we're going to do, I'll run it in part of the next demo. Because the next demo actually includes the security stuff as well. And that's important because this stuff is really useful. And it would be nice to tie the two together. So the data access application block is one of those that it showed that we use, and that is another input into all this process. It's also, I use it all the time whenever I'm accessing a SQL Compact Edition database, just for doing regular queries and updates and that sort of thing, because what it does all the intelligent connection management and closes your connections for you, and it just takes a lot of the nitty-gritty out of the way that you don't have to do. So this is compatible with the desktop enterprise library data access block, if any of you use that. The enterprise library is a whole bunch of stuff for logging, configuration, exception management, and it's got the data access block. So the one on the mobile side is completely compatible with that. So this is how you have a simple high-level API for calling database operations. So you simply get your connection string, and then you create yourself an instance of a SQL database object there. And then you can set up your, here's an example of getting a SQL C result set. And also all your connection management is just done for you. So it becomes a habit to do it this way, and it's less error prone, less code to write. I think battery's gone on this as well. There we go. So I showed you the code there. So just to reiterate that, the wizards only generate C# code, and they only work in Visual Studio 2005. So to walk through, this is the code I just showed you for how you do the same stuff in Visual Studio 2008. As I showed in the code, you create your behavior object, create a request object, set the right parameters, and then enqueue the request. And you've done exactly the same as if you were calling the client, the tool-generated DSA client code. Yes. Okay. I've got technological breakdown today. All right. And then you get your callbacks. You define them in the return callback and exception callback of that behavior, offline behavior object. So now we get to the password authentication. So this gives you all you need to easily encrypt keys, to store encryption keys and URLs, usernames and passwords. So this is a big problem because we don't have on devices. We don't log into a device. So a lot of the desktop Windows infrastructure kind of relies on the fact that to actually get onto it, you have to put a username and password. And at that point, you get authenticated to the domain or whatever. So you are who you say you are because you know this secret. There is nothing on a Windows mobile device that forces you to do that. So we have to roll our own kind of solutions for this. So this is what this is about. In the password authentication block, there's some classes and methods that make this job quite easy. So we have you would typically have, this is how typically it's going to work. You're going to have a desktop program which is in the charge of your systems administrator. And they run that and they put your username and password in for your mobile users. And then there's a bit of cryptography code that runs with an RSA, using RSA IAS cryptography. And that generates a token based on your username and password. Now, these tokens, you just have to get that onto the device. The token, even if you know the username and you know the token, you cannot work out the password. It's non-reversible encryption. So the implication of this is the token itself could be transmitted in clear text. It doesn't matter. If somebody finds it out, it's just well, you can see what it is. It's a base 64 encoded string. It's not valuable to anybody unless they know the username and password. But it's a token that represents that username and password. Now, the wonderful thing is that then, obviously, on your device, you have a login screen. The user puts their username and password in. You run the same bit of RSA AES cryptography, but using that token as an input, and the classes in the password authentication block can tell you whether they're compatible, whether the token is compatible with that username and password that they have put in. So the password itself never gets stored anywhere. It's always up in somebody's head, you know. So the people are obviously an important part of the system, as with any username and password based system. Password doesn't go anywhere. The tokens do, but you can do them in clear text. And if they match, everybody's happy. So this is the basis of a login thing. And this also ties in. Now, that's the easy bit, actually. Doing tokens is kind of easy. But then where it gets clever is where it ties into the config file stuff. So we have a tool to encrypt the config file sections, which looks like this. And this is shipped in the mobile client software factory. So you see the bit at the top there, the key thing? That is your symmetric master key. So this is the keys to your kingdom. So that has to be protected with your life. Nobody must know about that apart from a few trusted individuals. So this is the basis of your encryption system. For all your devices, even if you've got 1,000 devices, they're all going to be based on this one symmetric encryption key. Now, a symmetric encryption key is one that you use to encrypt stuff. And then when you come to decrypt it, like the contents of a config file, you need the exact same key. Now, the problem then becomes, all right, so I've encrypted my config file while I'm building my application, and I've put it in I've shipped it to 2,000 devices. That's cool, and it's encrypted. Nobody can read it. And now I need to get this symmetric encryption key onto all those devices so that they can read it again. They need to decrypt it. How do we do that safely? Well, how we do that is this bit down the bottom. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. So, yeah, so here you are. This is the bit. You actually put at the bottom, this thing has two purposes. The first thing was to encrypt the config file. Just go back again. So, yeah, the first bit of it is that you put in that section XML tag, you put your raw XML from your config file, and then you click the encrypt section bit here, and then it generates all that stuff, and that's what you paste into your config file. So that's your encrypted config file bit that's been encrypted with that symmetric key. Now this bit at the bottom. So this program, as I say, and it's shipped with full source code, so you can incorporate this into your own processes. That's the idea. But then you have to put the same username and password. The administrator puts the username and password in here, and typically, obviously, you'd automate this process. And then you click the encrypt key button at the bottom, and then that gives you the encrypted key. And what that is it's an encrypted version of your symmetric master key. But it's been encrypted using the username and password as entropy. So here's how the process works then. So first of all, you do the authentication bit using the token. This is on the client side, on the device now. So the user puts the username and password in. We've got the token over there. Tokens match, yeah, okay, so it is this user. This is the user. They have put a correct username and password in. And then Then you take that same username and password, you can generate a key which you can, from these, which you then use to decrypt that encrypted master key. And then, so you've now got back to the original symmetric encryption key, the master key, and you can use that to decrypt the config file. So this is what an encrypted section looks like in your config file. And then, so here the process is, like I said, you ship this config file to 2,000 devices, and then you need to actually get onto that device both the token for your user and also the user's encrypted master key. It's all encrypted based on the username and password, so it's safe. You can ship them over unsecured channels, not a problem. So you get them onto the device by any method. Maybe web service, you ship it on a, whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, needless to say, there are mechanisms in this for doing the change password and all this sort of thing, but that's kind of out of scope for this. So now the whole process becomes, like I said, the administrator has the master key, they put the username and password in, we use that to create two things, the authentication token and the encrypted master key. And then you get those onto the device, and on the device, the user logs in with their username and password. First of all, we use the token to decide if they are who they say. We say, yeah, absolutely. It gives us a password identity object, actually, at the code level. And the password identity has a property on it, which is the user-specific decryption key based on that username and password. So you then take that decryption key, pass it into another class, and that then decrypts your master key. And from that, you decrypt the config file. Job done. So, in practice, then, I have this latest version of this app. I say it's in VB, and I have actually down here a file called users.xml. This is how I am going to get the token and the encrypted master key for this particular demo. So to create the, I have also in this project, the config section, there's two projects here, user admin. So I'm first of all going to run that. This is how you create the tokens. So I'll put my username and password in here, which will be 123 for the purposes of this. Generate a token, and there's my user token. So I can take that. And stick it into here. And now I've got my, the other one is here. This is the one that's shipped with the, oh, first of all, before let's show you the code on this, just to show you how easy this is. Let's have a look at this, the code underneath this generate button. Yeah, there we go, that's it. So these are the classes that are provided for you in the, this is a class in the password authentication block. So you create a provider, you create yourself a password identity object. Giving it the username and password that the user has passed in. And then you generate yourself an authentication token, and that has a property called token data, which it gives you that token for the user. And the config section encrypt, run that. Like I said, so there's our key. So we need to do two things in here. First of all, let's go to our app.config. And here's the section that we want to encrypt. So we put that in there, and then we encrypt the section, and there's the encrypted section. So then we paste that into there. And then we go back to that program, and then the other thing we have to do is create our encrypted version of that master key for this particular user. So then we say encrypt key, and there we go. So this goes into our users file. rid of that. So now we're good to go. Oh, okay. Let's stop that. Now I want to run my main app on the device. I'm going to run this on an emulator, which is down here. And the code to do all this, I mean, it sounds terribly complicated, all these RSA, AES, cryptography, but you know the code I just showed you for generating the token? The code to do the other bits, to decrypt the master key and decrypt the config file, is no more complicated than that. So deploy that to the device. Still deploying that. Okay, that's succeeded. So I'll start running in a second. So this is the VB version running under Visual Studio 2008. So you can just add the projects, the source code to your solution. It will do the usual Visual Studio 2008 convert project thing. So obviously you want to keep that source base separate from your Visual Studio 2005 versions. But there's no coding changes required whatsoever. It will just work. So this will be with us in just a second. And the first thing it will do is put up a login form that I've added to this solution. Okay, so I can put my username in. I'll put a dummy password that's wrong. Try and hit the login. It will run the authentication. No, the token thing failed. I put my correct one in, hit the login, and we should be into the app. Now, I would go on to then show that the URL has been decrypted for the and we can do the thing, but I'll leave that for anybody who wants to stop, because it's lunchtime. I'm sure you're all wishing to get away. So just run through very quickly the last few slides on this. So, Subscription Manager is a high-level API for dealing with merge replication subscriptions. Makes that much easier. Updater application block I mentioned from Q4 Tech. The URL is there. You can also get that from Coplex. So these slides will be on my website and are on the TechEd website as well. So you can get these URLs. So I really would encourage you. I hope I've shown you that this is an infrastructure that solves a couple of key problems that we have to solve in a very neat way, and then you can use them in all your legacy apps. You don't need to adopt the CAB UI. So they're an easy win, big easy wins here, and I use them in all my stuff. It's reliable and it's good stuff, and it works. You've got the source code, so you know any concerns you have about stuff that's going on that you haven't got control over don't exist. So use them on all your new and legacy applications, and if you wish, you can also contribute to. They're trying to build a community around these things, around all the software factories from the Patterns and Practices group, so you can contribute yourself and add new things like a Bluetooth adapter and that sort of thing. And some resources, just quickly, I'm doing a repeat session of what's the new in Compact Framework 3.5 tomorrow morning. I'm sure I'm going to have lots of people who haven't been to the country parties tonight and are bright and breezy at that time and ready to learn about that. So if you missed my session yesterday, you can find out about that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. God help us. And then there's a panel discussion with myself and a number of other guys in Windows Mobile space after lunch on Friday. And a couple of other links there. I'll take Q&A after the session, because I'm sure many of you want to get off for lunch. Before I go, I want to give this book away. So let me think. Okay, so who can give me the name of the company that does the updater application block? No. No? Sorry? Q-Field Tech, you get it. Yes, that was correct. Yeah, sorry. All right, that's it. I hope that was useful to you. Any questions, please come and ask me. And thank you very much for listening. Thanks.